Welcome to this, our 10th episode of Rotary Reads. My name is Dave Bennett, member of the Rotary Club of Neepawa here in Manitoba. Rotary International is a worldwide organization with about 1.2 million members in 129 different countries. And each month there's a publication simply called Rotary sent out to all of the members. It's the hope of this program that we can share some of the stories and articles in the magazine that we get. Updates on local club activities or small club activities as well as worldwide initiatives. And with me today to help out is a longtime friend of mine, Glen Cummings. Glen and I started in school together and have kept in touch, of course, over the years. And he's a member of our club here as well. Welcome, Glen.
Thank you. And as everyone can see, Dave aged much better than I did.
Well, maybe I started before you. Maybe that's what it was it?
No, I don't think that's a problem.
Well, Glen,
I'm happy to be here today because these articles that we're looking at in the magazine are about the environment. And I must point out just one sliver of the environment, which is an area that I was quite interested in over the years. I spent some time in the Department of Environment for a while, hoping that we could improve projects and plans within government capability to improve our environmental activities and surroundings in our province. So these articles, while they will provide a sliver of information about the environment, they are not the first or the last pieces of information that people generally will need if they want to make decisions about the future of how they manage their materials, and in some cases their own businesses, which is very critical to how we might make successful efforts going forward.
Mm-hmm. That's right. The magazine that we're reading from today is the April 2020 issue. The title on the front is Death by Plastic. There's a lot of articles in here about the problems of plastic pollution in the environment. And what caught my eye, Glen, right off the bat was on page 1819, and we'll put up a slide of the picture. So a very large picture covers the 2 pages of a fisherman from Brazil. And it reads, Snapshot. And it's from Recife, Brazil. See how my accent is here.
Doing good.
The Capibaribe River, which flows through the heart of Recife into the Atlantic Ocean, has long been used as a dumping ground by people who live on its banks. Every year, Projeto Capibaribe, a non-profit organization dedicated to the preservation of the Capibaribe River, holds a one-day competition for local fishermen to see who can haul the most garbage out of the river. In 2018, the Rotaract Club of Recife and Conta Moca got involved, raising money to buy protective gear for the participants, provide food baskets for the fishermen's families, and pay a per diem to all the participants so that they didn't lose a day's income. So I thought that was a neat idea, that they actually got paid for the day of helping to clean up the river. Rotaractor Bernardo Ferreira, who captured this moment for the photographer, from the garbage collection, notes that the 2018 edition removed 30 tons of trash from the fishermen that day. So that's a pretty good day, and it's something a local area can do. Clean up a river. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I'll turn it over to you, Glen, and take us from there, some of the other things in the magazine. Well,
one of the interests that I always had was around a term that was used 30 years ago, which was sustainable development. And the sidebar to that was always act locally and think globally. And it emphasizes the fact that small actions on the part of each of us will in a cumulative manner will make an impact. But in this magazine that we're looking at today, the authors have taken a fairly narrow view of plastics. And I have an opportunity here, Dave, to look at the background of where the plastic came from, mm-hmm. what the science is behind plastic, and it helps to understand how dramatically we have used up our resources to create plastics, and why we have embraced them to the extent that we have. This article is out of a book written by Susan Frankel, and it has some interesting bullets that are quite useful in helping us think about the plastic that we're dealing with now and how we got to the state we are, because she titles the article "Welcome to Plasticville," and the population just unfortunately is the world population of 7.8 billion. So we're in a situation today where we have millions and millions of pounds of plastics that are available or in waste streams out there. And this article talks about the chemistry that started it. And that can be pretty dry, and Dave knows I wasn't a great chemist student in high school, but these facts are quite interesting. As we develop the article, how do we arrive at Plasticville? When exactly did we first steps into this synthetic world? Some would say it was before 1900, in 1870, when the inventor Wesley Hyatt patented a malleable compound that was originally conceived as a substitute for an increasingly scarce commodity, ivory. It was created from a natural polymer, the cellulose in cotton, combined with other ingredients, and Hyatt's brother dubbed the new product celluloid, meaning like cellulose. And when you think about it, the fact that they were replacing the demand for ivory is still an important thought today.
So that was a problem back then in terms of the elephant hunters and the ivory tusks and so on. That was a long time problem.
And sadly, we still have them, and that's 150 years ago.
Yes, yes.
So the date can also be traced to 1907, when a Belgian named Leo Baekeland baked up Bakelite. Try saying that 20 times. The first fully synthetic polymer. It was made entirely of molecules that couldn't be found in nature. With the product's invention, the Bakelite Corporation boasted humans had now transcended the classic taxonomies of the world, the animal, mineral, and vegetable kingdoms. We now had a fourth kingdom, according to their thinking. Those boundaries are now unlimited. And that was the type of hyperbole that probably spurred us forward into the world we're in today. Bakelite was invented to replace other scarce natural substance, shellac, a product of the sticky excretions of the female lac beetle. The demand for shellac began shooting up in the early 20th century because it was an excellent electrical insulator. It took 15,000 beetles 6 months to make enough amber-colored resin needed to produce a pound of shellac.
So the introduction of electricity, a great boon to society and so on, but then you look at, now you need insulation for it and so on.
Exactly.
And so they come up with something, and there's always a downside. When there's a positive side to an invention or a discovery or whatever, there's usually a downside somewhere or other.
Well, that's what this article will, I think, is going to help us understand. As it turned out, the product that Leo Baekeland invented by combining formaldehyde and phenol, a waste product of coal, and adding the mixture to heat and pressure was infinitely more versatile than shellac. Mm-hmm. It was dark-colored, rugged, and sleek, with a machine-like beauty. It could be precisely molded, machined into almost anything. Contemporaries called it a protein adaptability, and marveled at how Baekeland had transformed something as foul-smelling and nasty as coal tar, long a discard in the coking process, into this wondrous new substance.
You know, the first time I heard the word Bakelite was probably, 10, 11, 12 years old, and I got a new pair of shin pads for playing hockey. And they had Bakelite caps on the knees. And that was the term that my dad or somebody used. Anyways, when they're describing the hard plastic, previous to that, I think they were kind of softer materials, but thicker perhaps.
You didn't have them with Gordie Howe elbow pads too?
No, I didn't have those.
Well, the uses of Bakelite, as you can see, it was an extraordinary step forward. But then in the 20s and 30s, there was an outpouring of new materials from labs around the world. One was cellulose acetate, which is a semi-synthetic product. The plant cellulose was one of its base ingredients, and had the easy adaptability of celluloid, but it wasn't flammable. Another product was polystyrene, which was hard, shiny plastic that could take on bright colors, remain crystalline clear, or be puffed up with air, and it would become what DuPont later trademarked as styrofoam. Now we see lots of styrofoam in our world today, all the materials that are being shipped and the packing that goes with it.
There's just so much of it. I mean, it's cheap to produce, and it insulates, keeps things warm, but it creates a waste problem, that's for sure.
And it's certainly not recyclable.
Not really.
Because DuPont also introduced nylon, another product that is in great demand from over the years. The answer to the centuries-long search for an artificial silk. The first nylon stockings were introduced after a campaign that promoted the material as lustrous as silk, as strong as steel. Women were very interested. The stores sold out of their stock in hours, and in some cities, the scarce supplies led to nylon riots.
Nylon riots.
Across the ocean, British chemists discovered polyethylene, the strong, moisture-proof polymer that would become the pinnacle of packaging. Eventually, we'll get plastics with features nature had never dreamed of, surfaces which nothing could stick to, i.e. Teflon.
Oh, yes.
Fabrics that could stop a bullet, Kevlar, all important parts of our lives. And in the way we live in North America and in various parts of the world where a non-stick surface is important, we're there.
Yeah, back then we weren't really we weren't really worried about the throwing this stuff away and the problems we're going to cause by filling up landfills and things. So,
well, yes. That's right. And there is a difference between some of these products. Bakelite is fully synthetic. Many of these new materials differ in one significant way. Bakelite is a thermoset plastic, meaning that its polymer chains are hooked together, so the heat and pressure applied when it's molded through the heat and pressure when it's molded. The molecules set the same way that batter sets in a waffle iron. Once these molecules are linked into a daisy chain, they can't be unlinked. You can break a piece of Bakelite, but you can't melt it down to make it into something else. Polystyrene, nylon, and polyethylene are thermoplastics, and their polymer chains are formed in chemical reactions that take place before the plastic ever gets to a mold. The bonds holding these daisy chains together are looser than those in Bakelite, and as a result, these plastics readily respond to heat and cold. And unlike Bakelite, they can be molded and melted and remolded over and over again. Their shape-shifting versatility is one reason thermoplastics quickly eclipsed thermosets.
Yeah. So Bakelite went out of favor as soon as they were able to produce something better that would break down.
And interestingly, that's also key to what makes them recyclable down the road, which is a key to whether or not we're going to be able to continue to produce and have these products available to us. It's understandable that many saw the plastics as the harbinger of a new era of abundance. Plastics can easily produce cheaply, offered salvation from the haphazard and uneven distribution of natural resources that have made some nations wealthy, some impoverished others, and has led to numerous wars over the years. Plastics promised a multiple material utopia. At least that was the hopeful vision of a pair of British chemists in 1941 who said, "Let us try to imagine a dweller in the plastic age. The plastic man will come into a world of color and bright shining surfaces, And here's the key to what they were thinking: a world in which man, like a magician, makes what he wants for almost every need. Quite a stretch, even in today's world. The world was delayed in getting to plastics. World War II interfered. And over the course of World War II, the production of plastics leaped during the war because of its use, and it nearly quadrupled from 213 million pounds in 1939 to 818 million pounds in 1945. That production potential at the end of the war needed to go somewhere, and plastic exploded into the consumer marketplace.
Oh, yeah.
Just a few months after the war's end, thousands of people lined up to get into the first National Plastics Exposition in New York, a showcase of the new products made possible of plastics that had proven themselves during the war. For a public weary of 2 decades of scarcity, the show offered an exciting and glittering preview of the promise of polymers and the air of plenty that the hopeful British chemists had envisioned. The chairman of the exposition claimed nothing can stop plastics, as the crowd, I'm sure, broke into applause.
So we went from needs to wants.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
But you can understand, and those of us who are baby boomers or close to being baby boomers, we landed right in the middle of it, and our parents, and our mothers in particular, when these products were available to them, it had to be seen as a huge relief and a benefit to what was available to them in terms of managing their households.
They just come through all the restrictions of the war in terms of even sugar and things like that, and so you get opened up. I wonder if once COVID's gone and we get rid of our restrictions on COVID, are we all going to go wild?
Well, that would there's likely going to be a similar response of some significance.
Right.
Plastic production expanded explosively, and the curve that was steeper than even the GNP at the time. Plastics in this newly flush American society had never ended smorgasbord of affordable goods to choose from. These products and applications were so constant that soon became the norm. Tupperware surely always seemed to exist alongside Formica counters, Naugahyde chairs, red acrylic taillights, saran wrap, Barbie dolls, Lycra bras, wiffle balls, sneakers, sippy cups. I don't think we need to go on any further. That's an sampling of the availability of the products that were rushing into the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. And that was a few years ago that all those came about, so there's
That's
been
right.
a lot of new stuff since then, of course. Yeah, well, that's a good historical perspective. It's interesting how plastics got started. I found that article very interesting. Yeah, so.
In 1947, they were promoting it so quickly. They had the magazines of the day, which was rapid and reliable way to spread information and encourage consumption by the public. The magazine called House Beneficial promised housewives in a special issue in October of 1947 plastics, a better way to a more carefree life, which it would appear, and as you and I were just saying, there's really no doubt that if we had been in that generation rather than being the children of that generation, we would have grabbed it well after the hardships of the war.
I'm sure we would have, and we've made our mistakes along the way too.
Well, we're still doing it.
That's right. So, yeah, there's some people that they talk about in here, much forward thinkers, trying to solve some of these problems in forward-thinking ways. There's some excellent material in here. You're right.
Today, few materials we rely on carry such a negative set of associations or stir such visceral disgust as plastics, believe it or not, did for a while in the mid-60s and 70s. If we said that something was plastic, it was a way of degrading it and saying that it wasn't valuable. Everything was lacked too much durability even, the way we looked at it at those days. They were called cheap. So we've got the ebb and flow of the use of plastics, but many other materials that we relied on have made it for, and are still making great use of them in our society today. The fellow by the name of Norman Mailer, which is a well-known name, called it a malign force loose on the universe, the social equivalent of cancer. Pretty strong statement, and I'm not sure what decade he was making that statement, but I would think that people listened to him.
I know the name as a writer of articles and books and so on from 20, 30 years ago in my mind, but yeah, so not that long ago really. Yes, so.
One of the problems is that in its fundamental way, our plastics are alien, ever seen as being unnatural. So it's really no less natural than concrete or paper or steel or any other manufactured material. One reason may have to do with the unnatural endurance of plastics. Unlike traditional materials, plastic won't dissolve or rust or break down, not in any useful time frame. These long polymer chains are built to last, which means that much of the plastic that we've produced is still with us. It's with us in terms of litter, layers of landfill, debris in the ocean. Humans could disappear from the earth tomorrow, but many of the plastics that we made will be there for centuries. Many of them offer an object lesson that means to live in Plasticville, enmeshed in a web of materials that are rightly considered both a miracle and the menace of modern life. The story that this writer is pulling together is about these kinds of paradox. We enjoy unprecedented level of material abundance, and yet it often feels impoverishing, like digging through a box of styrofoam peanuts and finding nothing there. We like natural substances. We take natural substances created over millions of years, fashion them into products that are designed for a few minutes use, and then return them to the planet as litter that we've engineered to never go away. We employ plastic-based technologies that save lives as never before, that also pose an insidious threat to human health. We bury in landfills the same kinds of energy-rich molecules that we scoured the far reaches of the earth to find and excavate. We send plastic waste overseas to become raw materials for finished products that are sold back to us. And that's a pretty common theme in the last decade, that we are receiving back some of the waste plastic that we have sent to Eastern manufacturers to send back to us as new materials that we're prepared to pay for.
Well, that is a form of recycling.
Well, it is, as long as we don't float it over. As you've pointed out, there is an ocean current that will take debris from our shoreline into the Hawaiian shoreline. And well, we didn't anticipate that. It's well known that some of the debris that we might drop in the ocean on this side of the Pacific can end up on the Hawaiian shoreline.
And there was a short article just in these pages describing exactly that.
Yes.
Do you want me to take that, or?
Sure.
Okay, there's little sidebars beside these rather large articles on the environment, on plastics, and as this particular one was. And this little sidebar is called Paradise Lost. And it says Kamilo, which means twisting of the currents in Hawaiian. So it's an apt name for the beach near the southernmost tip of the island of Hawaii. Early Hawaiians combed the white sands of Kamilo Beach for driftwood. They used the enormous evergreen logs that had traveled there on ocean currents from the American Pacific Northwest to make dugout canoes. I always kind of wondered where they got material to make a dugout canoe over there, but it obviously came over on the currents of the ocean from the Northwestern Pacific. Today, the same ocean currents bring a different kind of debris to the beach, along with a new moniker, plastic beach, and the distinction of being one of the dirtiest beaches on Earth. A clockwise pattern of ocean currents called the North Pacific Subtropical Gyre flows south along the west coast of North America, goes west across the Pacific, north along the coast of Japan, and then back east across the Pacific again to complete the circle. In the middle of this is a calm spot, just like I guess the eye of a hurricane concept, known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Less a trash island twice the size of Texas than a soup of microplastics. Plastic from North America and Asia that is broken down into tiny pieces like spices floating in broth. The Hawaiian Islands act as a sieve, catching the debris carried by the vortex of water. An estimated 15 to 20 tons of trash washes up annually on the 9-mile stretch of coastline that includes Camilo Beach. 90% of it plastic from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So you're right, what we do on our side of the world gets somewhere else to the other side of the world.
Well, that leads me back to one final thought from Susan Frankel. The stakes are very high as Plasticville, her term, sprawls farther and farther across the landscape. We become more thoroughly entrenched in the way of life that it imposes. It is increasingly difficult to believe that this place of plasticization is sustainable, that the world can long endure our ceaseless improvement on nature. But we can start engaging in the problems that plastics pose. Is it possible to enter into a relationship with these materials that is safer for us and more sustainable for our offspring? So that leads to the question, is there a future for Plasticville? And given that it's so entrenched in our society, I'm sure there's a lot of people that say, well, how would we manage without it?
Well, you know, they got along without it before, so I guess we can, and there's new ideas and new ways of doing things. In fact, just on a sidebar, mention that there, Glenn, it's things you can do personally, you know, as to what, and I do some of them, probably not enough of them, and you do too. Maybe I could just indicate here, it says carry a refillable water bottle and decline the free ones that are offered at meetings. I know you go to a meeting or a conference or anything like that, and they have a refreshment break, and of course there's plastic bottles of water. And with COVID now, you know, people are going to be more careful about what they take your own, and there should have refillable stations. Airports now have refillable water stations after you pass security, where you can't have any liquid. And if you've got your empty refillable bottle with you, you fill it up at the refillable station, and you've got it for your flight. So there's definitely one way. A lot of people are doing that. You see that happening. And here is an interesting one. I've never done this, but when you go to a restaurant, and quite often, you know, they give you too much, and so you take some home, and they bring you the styrofoam containers to take it home in. Well, suggestion here is bring your own takeout container to restaurants. So you take your own reusable, washable takeout container, knowing that you're not going to be able to eat everything anyway, and then you just simply put your food that you're taking home into your own container and save those. So there's a couple of really pretty easy ways. Now this other one here really kind of bothered me. It said one average load of laundry containing synthetic fibers, or containing synthetic fabrics. So if you're washing, which most of our clothes have some form of synthetic in them. It sends more than 6 million plastic fibers down the drain. That's one wash. One wash. How many people are washing twice a week and do 3 loads on there? So look at the million of plastic fibers going down the drain. So wear natural fibers instead rather than synthetics, or as it says here, buy secondhand clothes. I suppose they've been washed a few times, and that's the major amount of plastic debris that can come out of them. So yeah, lots we can do towards that. So where are you headed from here?
Well, I was going to touch on this article that Diane Schoberg wrote about a Eisenhower Fellowship student by the name of Kopak, who spent weeks traveling in South America and Europe. During that time, he meeting with leaders in government and businesses, leaders at universities and nonprofits, discussing what he was hoping to get insight on, the future of our economy. And what he is openly discussing and talking to those who will listen about, including us, that there's a linear economy that our world has been functioning on for decades, years. For over 200 years or so, the economy functioned on the fact that we could cut or dig up materials, raw resources, use them, and when we were done with the product that we made out of them, we could throw it into the waste stream and carry on. And he has a couple of interesting features where he talks about the fact that there are places in the world where not only our economies but the population have accepted the fact that they need to start looking at a circular economy. Now, a circular economy, I'm sure everybody would latch on to why that sounds familiar. A feature of the latter is its approach to plastics, of which we're focusing on today. It was once celebrated for its disposability. Mm-hmm. Collecting and reusing consumer plastic can be a circular practice. He got into the details of this circular economy while he was being interviewed by this Miss Schoberg. A different way of thinking about material use, a different way of thinking about our economy, is the quote. Furthermore, this approach helps delineate the role that businesses can play proactively to create a better world. Now, that's pretty high ideals, but it's not, aim high and do your best is a really good way to look at the difference between a linear and circular economy. This gentleman has a BA from university, his MBA from Yale, and a School of Management, where he also now is the Sustainable Business Innovation Manager for a natural health and beauty care business that is well known around the world. But I think one of the aspects that I took from this article was where it's very useful to talking about the current economy, which we've had pretty much in place since the Industrial Revolution, the linear economy that I just spoke of. We cut and we dig and we use it once or twice, and very often we throw it away. An expectation that waste is inherent and necessary. Now, even when we were starting out in our careers, Dave, we were faced with questions about, well, what can we do to change the opportunities in our communities, for sure. And if we are successful, then we can influence further and further in the world and in the economy. But we have developed an economy largely through our generation where we have actively designed waste and keep materials into the waste stream. We can start designing materials that we keep in the loop. We try to keep using them over and over, and through that process, we will create jobs and protect the environment as we manage our economy and grow. Now, an example would be building construction. Now, we have some ways today that building materials are reconstituted to be reused, but it's certainly not a widespread practice in our society.
Well, it's interesting, particularly in our North American society. You go over to Europe, England, I've lived there, and a 300 or 400 year old building is still fairly new.
That's right.
Their materials continue to be used. They're not like ours. That's right. Yeah. So, I noticed here he mentioned it's almost like Lego or Lincoln logs.
Yep.
That we'd put them together as kids. And then you'd take them apart and you'd build a different house or a different pen or a different something or other. I didn't realize we were so far ahead in our thinking back then, Glenn. Reusable building construction.
My Tinker Toys.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, and a good way of looking at this was something that came up in Life magazine in 1955 that Kopak refers to. When Life ran a story called Throwaway Living, a picture of a smiling family and a bunch of common day-to-day items that they had thrown up in the air, and the picture was catching them in the act and the article still in the air, so that they were throwing them away. The story was celebrated on the convenience that came from disposability, where you don't have to wash your dishes. The idea was that you could simply throw things away after you had used them, as if there was something called away. Well, there's only so many places you can call away, and they're not totally without their problems as well. As you indicated about the ocean, I mean, over the centuries, there's been people and businesses, unfortunately, who have used the oceans in manners that we prairie folk might not realize. We have lots of landfill space, but the materials that are in that landfill, there's very often high contents of energy available in there that we are not making use of.
Did you do some landfill? We've got about 5 minutes left here, Glenn. So did you do some investigation into landfills? I think you were telling me when you were an MLA with our Manitoba legislature, and in fact, that was an area that you were a minister of, if I recall.
Well, we did some landfill review in conjunction with trying to establish the recycling program here in Manitoba. And one of the things that was interesting is that landfills, in order to make them safe, we cap them and we put them in areas that don't leach. But at the same time, we seal off a lot of activity that might help eliminate the volume of waste that's there. And while it is useful, and you and I thought about this a little bit a couple of days ago when we were talking, we looked at, when we tested landfills, we could drill down 40 feet in a landfill and find pieces of newspaper that you could still read. But even though newspaper is recyclable, if it ends up in a landfill, it doesn't decompose rapidly. That would be one example of what goes on in a landfill that we don't expect.
Yeah, so that's a good example. If it's recyclable, put it in the recycling. If the items are being recycled, paper and cardboards are a really good example of that. If treated properly, they can be recycled quite easily.
Well, there has to be a drive by society and business to make sure that they are recyclable, because one of the things that causes trouble with our local recycling would be contaminated materials. But the second part of that is that there is a limit, and people were working on dealing with the limitation in this area. Newspaper, you can start to degrade the fibers, and after a while it does become less than reusable for newsprint. So then there has to be an alternative stream for it. But it does require a lot of ongoing planning and careful management within our society. This article where Mr. Kopak was talking about other systems that are available that perhaps we should start taking a look at. None of these articles are hard and fast, backed up by huge studies or figures of books of knowledge about what will happen. But there's some notable things that are happening. There's a study right now in the European economy, as you mentioned, that there are opportunities within transition. They're definitely going to be beneficial, but there can be opponents to them. And one of the reasons that this is difficult for those of us in day-to-day world trying to figure out which way our resources should be going is that this study indicated that there was a possibility and a probability of 2 trillion being added to the European economy by this shift. There were huge opportunities with this transition, yet there's definitely going to be opposition as going forward. But it's difficult because it can require massive reinvestment in transition and a new way of operating, so that you will see that resistance, but that is often just a way of protecting the status quo. Now that's not a good comment on the way we think in our society, but
Well, isn't it that we've only got a couple of minutes, Glenn? Isn't it just we do try to protect the status quo? I mean, you can take just about any topic that's going on right now. You could, maybe people maybe that are opposed to the vaccine. Well, they want the status quo. Leave it the way it is. Don't be changing things on me all the time or putting a new pressure on things. But in this regard, we have to make changes, and you really have to start with the big companies and get them on board. There's no doubt about that. And that starts from the ground with the. I remember when recycling came in and my kids were in grade school, and I've said this before, I give a shout out to the teachers in the elementary schools because they introduced the recycling programs that the kids brought home. I never recycled anything until my kids told me to. You can't put that in the garbage, Dad, that's got to be recycled. So that was, I remember that, getting on board with the problem and the recycling and so on. So,
well, if I could observe on one aspect that I see happening in our society right now is there's too many people who have extreme views on both sides. And as we change society and how it goes forward in these types of programs, it does need to recognize that there will be a shift, and it needs to be a reasonable shift, leading to a strong outcome.
And that requires discussion and listen more than you talk.
Exactly.
As to that. So, well, I could just maybe a couple of things here. There's a sidebar here in the last minute or so, things your club can do, directed to us as Rotary clubs, but it would be to any other club or organization as well. The Rotary Club of Bandur Sungai Patani in Malaysia worked with its meeting venue to offer pitchers of water in reusable cups instead of plastic bottles. And we do that at our meetings here. We've always had the water jug on the table. And the glass, sometimes they're plastic glasses. Right. The Rotary Club of, this is a long one, it is in India, Walhakarwadi, India, they rent stainless steel dinnerware for its meetings. So no plastics, and it has to be, and the company takes it and washes it and so on. They pay the extra for the renting of it. Here's an interesting one. There's the Rotary Club of Annapolis in Maryland in the USA. They partnered with a local environmental organization and a composting company to make its annual Crab Fest feast zero waste for the past 7 years. So they have this big crab feast fundraiser, and zero waste, they claim. The event uses compostable cups, trays, and utensils, composts all food waste, and each year they estimate 14.5 tons of waste is composted.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's something the club is doing, and you're selling it to the community as well by doing those kinds of things. So we all need to step up and do that. So hopefully you've enjoyed the program today. We certainly could have another one on the environment. Environment is the 7th focus that Rotary has added to its list of focuses for doing good in the world. Thank you for watching.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build good? Will it better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? When we pay it forward, it will be returned. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned?